Hi, this is the trade activity of the orderIT system for November the 19th, 2020. There were 14 trades that were tripped. 8 were identified as buys and 6 were identified as short sells. We're just going to go through each one and have a review to see if trades were positive or negative. First trade is BSX, Boston Scientific Corporation. It tripped at 11:15.13 at a price of 34.16. It was identified as a short sell. It had gone down 0.15% for the day. It ended the day at 34.21, so that ended the day above its tripping price. Let's see if there's any point through the day it was below that though. It tripped at 11:15. This period here, as you can see, it dropped down just right afterwards below that, 34.09. Down here, it was down there, and it was down there for a good period, and then it came up. So there were 2 points in the daytime where it did drop below the trigger price, so I consider that a positive trade. It would have required the investor to obviously monitor the stock, but it's still potentially a positive trade. The analysis of the stock showing it was moved down in the morning, and then mid-afternoon it came up and then came back down and stabilized at the end of the day, and MACD somewhat showing it did come down in the morning and then started coming back and down, bouncing back and forth a bit, but it was down as much as it was up on MACD. OBB, it was very strongly down in the morning. On DI, came back and up, and then the day it actually was reverting back. Again, showing again bouncing back and forth, but again it was down as much as it was up. And Bollinger Bands does show that it was some the point there where it's moving. It was somewhat moving downwards a bit. It did have a recovery point at this section here in the early afternoon, but even at that point it did come back down again. So that stock actually was moving down on a fairly steady basis. Next stock is CYH, Community Health Systems. It was tripped at 11:15.18 at a price of 8.49. It was indicated as a buy trade. It rised 5.21%. That's a good rise, and it went up to 8.68. So it ended the day above its trigger. So by the end of the day, it would have been positive. Yeah, this analysis is not good. It doesn't actually have the full day. It looks like it lost information or lost data. The data provider looks like it stopped sending data. So I'm going to leave that as is. Go to the next trade. AEO, American Eagle Outfitter Incorporated. It was tripped at 12:30.54 at a price of 16.80, indicated as a short sell. It was up 1.73 for the day, and at the end of the day it was actually at 17.06. So any point where it was down below that, again 12:30, which roughly in this area. It basically recovered right after the tripping price. So let's just take a look and see if the analysis shows anything positive-wise. And it tripped and came down then came back up again. OBB is basically not showing a good strong downwards. MACD showing it was coming down around that time with a trip, but right afterwards again it shot right up, even though end of day though it was coming down again. DI showing it somewhat negative in the morning time, and then actually afternoon it came back up, which is what we're actually seeing across the board. At the end of the day it was somewhat coming back. The Bollinger Band, it basically ended the day up, and it was showing it was moving upwards at the end of the day, even though it was showing a somewhat negative turnaround at that point. It was still not positive. I'll consider that a not buy. I would not consider that a good trade that if it was done on that stock. The system identified it based on obviously at the point where it was tripped, it was moving strongly in the direction that it indicated, but just in general the stock though reverted after that point. Next trade is GEO. That's the GEO group. It tripped at 1255.35 at a price of 934. It was tripped as a short sell. It also was up 0.64% that by the end of the day, and it closed at 945. So we'll have to see if there's any point where it came down below that. As you can see, it's see, right at the point where it was tripped, it did continue dropping, but then recovered, and it never fully dropped below the trigger price on a consistent basis. So that is not. You see, OBV is showing that it was moving down up until roughly the early afternoon, and then late afternoon it basically came back at volume-wise. So volume showing that it basically was recovering. MACD showing roughly the same thing. Morning it was coming down, afternoon it was coming up. Excuse me. DI showing roughly the same. Well, actually, blue is his negative. DI showing that morning, DI was coming up, it was down, and then, positive coming stronger, and in the day it was basically sideways, which is basically Bollinger Band is somewhat showing. It was coming down, stabilized, and going back up, and basically stabilized at where it's at. I'll consider it a possible because the aspect that it was moving fairly strongly downwards in the morning till early afternoon, and it made a bit of a recovery and then started moving sideways. So it wasn't that it was shot up, it shot up a bit and then moved sideways. So the end result is not a positive trade, but I don't consider it a negative trade either. I'll mark it as a possible trade. Next trade is AVYA. Avaya Holdings Corporation. It tripped at 115.07 at a price of 17.11, and it was tripped as a buy. And interestingly enough, this actually stock was down almost 10%, and it closed the day at 16.41. So that's actually not a positive trade. Tripped at 115. So right around this area. At this point, you can see it came up quite a bit. It actually was up quite a bit, but it would have had to been caught. You can see right after its high point for the day it was down, but afterwards it came up in a good 10-15 minutes. It was up above the trigger price. I consider that a positive trade, even though it would have been a very careful trade that would have had to been done as the aspect of the stock basically going down after its high point. And as you can see, OBV showing sideways movement, and then you can see at the point where it tripped, it shot up and then came right back down again. That's one thing about stocks is, you don't really know what's actually driving it, and when you see the actual analysis of it, it's a bit peculiar. You're sitting there saying, well, why is it driven up and then basically reverted almost 180%? but again, that's what you see. What caused it? Well, that's an evaluation that I'm not going to do, obviously. MACD showing the same thing. It came up in the afternoon and then dropped right afterwards, mid-afternoon. DI actually bouncing back and forth. In the day, though, it was going negative. So, a very, very tricky buy, but still was paused because it did rise above its trigger price. Next trade is FANG, Diamondback Energy. Excuse me. It tripped at 115.43 at a price of $37.92, and it was indicated as a buy trade. It was up 4.50%, so that's good. Ended the day at $39.44, so that's technically another positive trade because it ended the day above its trip price. Let's just check the analysis. OBV showing it basically moving up the whole day. MACD, for the most part, it was up for a good portion of the day, but bouncing back and forth a bit. DI showing it, fairly consistently positive. And of course, Bollinger Band is basically a representation of price, and it's showing it just was going up. Next trade is LB. L Brands Incorporated. It tripped at 131.04 at a price of $39.01, and it was indicated as a buy trade, and ended the day at $39.55, up 17.67%. So this was up a lot, and ended the day above its tripping price. So we consider that a buy trade, a buy operation. Quickly look at the analysis to see if it actually is showing it. OBV is showing good afternoon activity, but somewhat a bit sideways morning and late afternoon. MACD again showing the same kind of consequences, moving up in the mid-afternoon. DI, it was up again mid-afternoon. Late afternoon it was shooting up, so that's good. And Bollinger Band again, almost moving sideways, but you can see end of the day it was moving upwards. So it was strong, and again it was up 17.67, and it looks like that's probably what it opened up. Yeah, it opened up at that price, so it opened up high and just basically maintained it. The actual stock price is showing you it was moving sideways, but there was multiple points where it came up above its tripping price. Next trade is DENN, that's Denny's Corporation. It was tripped at 210.52 at a price of $10.81, indicated as a short sell. It closed the day at $10.87. As you can see, though, early morning it actually dropped down to $10.70, so it actually dropped below the trigger price. So the day after this would have been a positive trade. We'll see if there's any point that it indicated it was moving down. So roughly in this area, and it looks like it didn't recover. It looked like after the tripping point it actually started to recover, so let's check to see if the analysis is showing it potentially moving strongly in the direction that was indicated. OBV is not really showing anything concrete, bouncing back and forth. MACD is actually showing it was down below baseline, so it was down in general, but the actual graphing is showing that DI was mostly negative for the whole day, and DI is showing again same thing, practically negative for the whole day. And interesting enough, Bollinger Bands is showing it moving down. To me, this is a possible. Next trade is IQE. I think that's the way you pronounce it, I don't know. It was tripped at 225.04 at a price of 22.63. It was actually indicated as a short sell, and as you can see at the end of the day, it was actually down from the tripping price, even though the stock itself was up. It was up for the day at 0.09%. So technically, it was moving positive, even though it was tripped as a negative trade. But as you can see, it ended the day below its tripping price, so that's good. And you can see it was somewhat moving sideways, even though it looked like it opened up high and stayed high. Well, it came up, I guess, high because it's only 0.09%. It basically was moving sideways. And not really much there, but even though the end result is by the end of the day, you could have made some money. And as you can see, OBV sideways morning time, afternoon it came down and moved sideways at the end of the day. So this early afternoon it was showing it moving negative. MACD, same type of thing. Afternoon showed negative and a bit of recovery, but then again by the end of the day it was showing negative again. DI showing it negative but bouncing back and forth, so that's not strong. Bollinger Band, it was somewhat showing a steady decline in the afternoon. So Bollinger Band is somewhat proving the fact that it was moving down. Next trade, CSIQ, Canadian Solar Incorporated. It was tripped at a time of 238.49 at a price of 37.80. It was actually indicated as a buy, even though the stock itself was down 4.03%, and it tripped at 37.80, closed at 37.16, so definitely not positive at that point. You can see, the stock itself, while it did drop early morning, it did actually start recovering for the most part the whole day. So 37.80 at a time of 238, so right around here, and as you can see, no, it actually didn't come up above. The tripping price was not raised or came above. Check to see what the analysis is showing. Again, mid-afternoon it shot up. A bit of a decline late afternoon, but it shot up. MACD was showing it somewhat consistently positive. Late afternoon, no, it actually was showing it instead of moving negative again. DI, again, showing it positive for the most part of the day. Bollinger Band, as you can see, is showing that it was moving up consistently through the whole day, except at the end of the day where it reverted a bit. To me, this is a possible, just because of the fact of the movement of the stock. And the indicator is showing that it was somewhat moving positive during the daytime. Next trade is ET, Energy Transfer LP. It was tripped at a time of 245.02 at a price of 612. It was indicated as a buy trade. It tripped at a price of 612. It closed at 612. It was actually up 8.32%. 245 roughly in this area. It came up to 611, 614, 613. It would have been trippy, but there were actually multiple points during the late afternoon where it did come up above its indicator price. So I'm going to consider that another positive trade, even though again it would have been another tricky trade. You would have had to monitor it, or at least put a closing price on it on a reasonable value. You know when it came up, but you can see the stock itself was moving up for the whole day, and it was up a good amount. It's showing a bit of a upward trend, a price increase pre-market. So in general, it looks like a good trade that occurred, even though not 100% positive. 14.52. As you can see, it was somewhat, again, moving strong. The OBV-wise is showing that, it was moving pretty much positive all day long. excuse me. MACD actually didn't start showing positive until late afternoon, and actually mid-afternoon was showing positive, but late afternoon, as you can see, it's showing it moving downwards. And DI, again, mostly positive for the whole day, and as you can see, mid-afternoon it was moving strongly positive, but by the end of the day it was making a bit of a comeback, even though it was showing that it was still positive by the end of the day. And Bollinger Bands basically showing, moving sideways morning, came up mid-afternoon, and started moving sideways late afternoon, but in general, still a positive trade. It was still, indication-wise, moving very strongly in a positive direction. Next trade is JWN Nordstrom Incorporated. It tripped at 245.02 at a price of 21.34. It indicated as a buy trade. It closed at 21.49. It was up 3.37%, so that's good. It actually came down this morning by a good percentage amount. So it closed high, so that's still a positive trade, but these are the things with respect to day trading that's, very, very particular. As the aspect is, you never know what's going to happen the next day, especially, morning time. It may give you an indication of what potentially is going to happen. Right now, this positive trade, which was a fairly good positive trade, is showing almost a half reversal early morning. So that would have been, something that you would have wanted to get out by the end of the day, obviously, to not take any risk the next day, which just want to show you that there was a risk, obviously, because it came down. We'll take a look at the analysis. OBV came up early afternoon a bit, but for the most part morning and afternoon it was basically moving sideways.
Market data connection lost.
MACD is showing a somewhat positive movement for the whole day, so that's another. DI showing from early afternoon to late afternoon. It was basically moving positive and moving fairly strongly, heavily positive, so that's good. Bollinger Band showing you, yes, this stock was moving up, so the end result is this stock was a positive trade, positive moving stock, so nothing wrong with respect to the outcome of that stock. The indicators itself, the eye showing somewhat, yes, it's moving positive, even though you can see some bouncing back and forth, but it's still showing it moving strongly. MACD again, so the indicators are somewhat showing the same thing. Next trade, excuse me, PLD, ProLogic Incorporated, PLD. It tripped at 331.37 at a price of 99.78, and it was indicated as a short sell. At the end of the day, above its tripping, but it was down 1.39%, so it was moving down, or it was down from its previous close. And let's see, 331, 335. You can see it was. This is where it was basically tripped. It basically came down a little bit right after its tripping price. We'll take a look at the analysis, see if it gives a stronger indication of that movement. And as you can see, it's showing it was moving very much negative in the morning time, and basically started recovering. MACD showing again, yes, came up in the mid-afternoon, but shot right down again in the mid-afternoon, but recovered again. So MACD basically bounces back and forth. DI showing the same results. It was down morning time, early afternoon, late afternoon, mid-afternoon, down early afternoon, late mid-afternoon, type of thing. So bouncing back and forth. And Bollinger Band, it was showing itself. I can only mark this as a possible. I won't mark it as a complete negative, because you can see it did come down a bit below that. In general, it looked like this the indicator is showing that it could be moving down as much as it's moving up, and the Bollinger Bands are somewhat indicating that it was somewhat end of the day negative, even though right at the end of the day it was making a bit of a recovery, but in general it was somewhat, possible end result, even though the end of the day result would have not been positive. DVN, Devon Energy Corporation, it tripped at 345.07 at a price of $13.54, and it was indicated as a buy. It ended the day at 13.56, so technically it was up at the end of the day, and it was up 6.27%, so it was actually up a good amount. So this stock was moving somewhat positive. In general, obviously, and as you can see, we caught it today, but you can see it was actually moving fairly strongly OBV-wise for the afternoon. MACD, it came up early afternoon, and then basically was moving downwards a bit, and recovered at the end of the day, but it was as much negative as positive in the afternoon, so that's interesting. DI, though, was showing that actually afternoon it was basically moving fairly strongly positive. So DI showing a good thing. Bollinger Band basically was showing the results of that. So this stock definitely was moving positive. So the end result is we have a result of 9 absolute positive trades, and we actually had 14 trades overall, so that's 64%, so that actually is a bit down. If we included the possibilities, there's actually 4 possibles, which would have increased this quite a bit, but I'm not going to include them in this because I want to say that this is the absolute positive trades, and as you can see, it's not as high as it's been for the last couple of days, but it's still technically positive, but obviously a bit more of a trickiness in this particular day. Anyways, I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.